Senator McGarvey. Senator Nemes.
Present in the room.
Senator Schroeder.
Present in the district.
Thank you. Senator Storm. Senator Thomas. Thank you. Senator Wise. Representative Blanton.
Present in the room.
Representative Fleming. Representative Hatton.
Present in the room.
Representative Jenkins.
Present in the room.
Representative Riley. Representative Sharp.
Present in the room.
Vice Chair Howell.
Present in my district.
Thank you. Vice Chair Beckler. Co-Chair Carroll. And Co-Chair Nemes.
Present in the room.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll note that this month was supposed to be chaired by Senator. I'm going to take it this month. Senator Carroll, I'm going to take it this month, and I think he'll be covering next month, so we're going to flip months. Before we get started, we need to approve the minutes for July 16, 2021, so I'll accept a motion. Moved by Representative Fleming and seconded by Senator Nemes. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. The minutes are approved. Okay, we're going to get right into it. And so I'm going to give the floor over to Mr. Spears and Mr. Thomas. Identify yourselves for the record, and you may proceed.
All right. Hello, I am Will Spears, and this is Joel Thomas. Just do from beginning. There you go. All right. The committee directed staff to examine salaries, benefits, and retirement packages of executives and administrators at Kentucky's public post-secondary education institutions. Committee staff asked the institutions to provide salary and taxable benefits for 2015 to 2019. After preliminary analysis, committee staff analyzed compensation based on a comparison between 2 years and compared salaries against a standardized median. The memo and supporting tables provided to the committee serve as a response to the topic and will be available to the public after this meeting. For this presentation, we are mainly going to discuss the supporting tables. Committee staff requested a sample of administrators rather than all administrators. This reduced the time needed for a response and compensated for COVID-19's effect on schedules. The sample focused on 18 types of administrators that were present at the majority of institutions in 2015. The full list of positions are provided in Table 1 from the supporting tables. If administrators left or their responsibilities changed, institutions were told to provide compensation for the person providing the same or the most similar responsibilities. Some positions were not present at some institutions, and UK provided medical administrators, so there were a varying number of positions. To compensate for the large number of community colleges, the colleges were asked to provide information only on chief executive officers, chief academic officers, and human resource officers. The sample requested the actual amount paid to administrators and any taxable benefits. To compensate for variations in how data were submitted, compensation was categorized into direct and indirect compensation, which we will discuss more later. Committee staff then compared compensation across time and across institutions. The time comparison was conducted by comparing the same position in 2015 and 2019 to see if compensation had increased over time. For the comparison across institutions, salaries were compared with median salaries of other similar positions. During our analysis, institutions expressed concerns about comparing compensation across institutions and the appropriateness of the comparisons. We address these concerns in two ways. First, we use a national survey from the College and University Professional Association for Human Resources that was called the Administrators in Higher Education Annual Report. In 2019, the survey had responses from 1,174 institutions. All the Kentucky institutions except Kentucky State participated in it. Based on discussions with the Southern Regional Education Board and the Kentucky Center for Statistics, this was the most comprehensive salary resource for administrators. The survey had standardized job descriptions which were used to categorize positions. This allowed for comparisons of relatively similar positions. The comparisons will not be perfect because of variations in responsibilities, but there is not a better source for comparison, and it allows for a general comparison. We also allowed the institutions to provide feedback twice. First, we presented our median comparisons and tables of how we converted submitted titles into standardized titles. We asked institutions to comment on any salaries significantly above or below the median to see if there were justifications. Second, we presented tables of compensation across time to the institutions. Despite working with the institutions, we encountered data issues that prevented the analysis from being as certain as we would prefer. Using the actual amounts paid accurately represents spending, but it introduces uncertainty when positions are vacant, filled part of the year, transferred between staff, or when responsibilities change. These were all common, as shown in Table 2 from the supporting tables, and they made comparisons more difficult. Responses often combine benefits in ways that prevented analysis of individual benefits. For example, retirement benefits would be combined with other benefits, or all benefits would be combined into a single category. When benefits are inconsistently combined, we cannot say, for example, that one university spends more on retirement plans. To compare responses, we group benefits into cash payments or all other benefits. With the exception of Eastern, institutions provided data by calendar year. Despite issues with the data, we are presenting our results now, which is consistent with generally accepted auditing standards. The relevant standards are for completeness and for timeliness. The completeness standard says there should be sufficient evidence to satisfy objectives and understand the matter while providing perspective on the extent and significance of findings. We're providing a report to help you understand compensation, but we're being clear about data limitations. The timeliness standard discusses that evidence should be provided in time to respond to report users, while stating that evidence is more helpful if current. We could continue to work on the compensation data, but it becomes less current every day. The information is being provided now, while the compensation amounts are still relevant. To provide context for the compensation discussion, this table shows how compensation relates to the institutions as a whole. It provides personnel cost as a percentage of total expenditures. Northern left the Kentucky Employees Retirement System after submitting its budget and expects its actual personnel cost to be about 53.7%. Personnel costs comprised about 41 to 61% of total cost, depending on the institution and the year. There does not appear to be a correlation between total expenditures and personnel expenditures. UK and Louisville had the largest total expenditures, but they're about in the middle of the list. Kentucky State is near the top and had the lowest total expenditures. Starting here, we're going to mainly discuss the supporting tables. Table 2 has turnover and title changes for 2015 through 2019. The turnover columns are for the number of institutions in which the person holding a position changed at least once. So all 8 universities reported a CEO, and 6 universities changed their CEO at least once. Turnover sometimes happened multiple times for the same position, but it was only counted once per institution. For example, Kentucky State had 3 different presidents. Turnover was common at both the universities and the community colleges. Turnover has a significant effect on compensation because different administrators will receive different compensation based on their background. The title change columns represent the number of institutions where titles significantly changed. This excluded minor changes, like changing from an interim vice president to a vice president. If a title changed multiple times, it was only counted once per institution. These changes were common at universities, but not the colleges. Title changes can significantly impact compensation because they often represent changes in responsibility. An example is Louisville's chief business officer, which goes from a senior vice president for finance and administration and chief operating officer to an associate VP for finance and business affairs to a vice president and chief financial officer.
Committee staff grouped compensation into direct and indirect compensation. Direct compensation was comprised of 7 categories where money went directly to the individual. Additional payments were typically for taking on new roles or responsibilities. Some KCTCS executives and administrators received executive allowances, which were additional payments with no restrictions used to retain executives. Deferred compensation here was for a one-time lump sum payment to presidents of Western and the University of Kentucky. Direct compensation changes for administrators from 2015 to 2019 are covered by tables 4, 5, and 6 in the supporting documents. The analysis only included positions that were filled in both 2015 and 2019. To remove minor variances, compensation was considered to have changed when there was at least a 10% decrease or increase. The 2015 values were also adjusted for inflation. So, an increase means that direct compensation increased faster than inflation, while a decrease indicates that compensation did not match inflation. There were no discernible patterns of increases or decreases from 2015 to 2019 for job classifications. However, increases in direct compensation were most common at University of Kentucky and at Eastern. Decreases were more common at the University of Louisville. Direct compensation was higher at the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville than at other institutions, with top positions there often earning more than twice the compensation of similar positions at other institutions. The president's direct compensation was often higher at Western and Northern than at Eastern, Moorhead, or Murray. At the community college system office executives and administrators generally had higher direct compensation than their equivalent positions in the colleges. Table 7 in the supporting documents has a summary of direct compensation beyond salary. Most positions, about 55%, only received a salary. The next most common category were payments of less than $10,000. However, there was a large compensation tied to additional payments for new roles or responsibilities, with 9 entries for chief executive officers and athletics directors reporting additional payments of more than $250,000. Some KCTCS executives and administrators received executive allowances, which are summarized in Table 8. These were additional payments with no restrictions used to retain executives. Around 24 administrators received allowances each year, with the median allowances ranging from about $12,000 to about $19,000. Any benefit that did not result in cash going to administrators was combined into indirect compensation. All institutions offered health insurance, life insurance, and retirement plans. All institutions offered a defined contribution retirement plan with an employer match, with the exception of Northern Kentucky University. All institutions, other than the University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville, also offered a defined benefit plan. Other benefits included presidential housing, vehicle expenses, moving expenses, cell phone allowances, tuition benefits, and country club dues. Indirect compensation changes are covered by tables 10, 11, and 12 from the memo's supporting document. Like direct compensation, it only includes positions filled in both 2015 and 2019, and only counts changes of 10% or greater. Changes in indirect compensation reflect changes in direct compensation because some forms of indirect compensation, such as retirement, are based on salary. Similar to direct compensation, there was not an obvious pattern in increases or decreases across job classifications. Indirect compensation increases were more common at the University of Kentucky and Eastern, whereas decreases were more common at Kentucky State, Moorhead, Murray, and Western. Salaries for 2019 were also compared against a national median. These came from the Coupa HR survey, in which every institution except Kentucky State participated. The survey divided institutions into categories of doctoral, master, baccalaureate, and associate colleges. The University of Kentucky submitted 4 healthcare administrative positions that did not have a clear comparison in the Coupa HR dataset. Doctoral medians were used as the schools were considered doctoral institutions. Community college system offices participated in the survey, but a system office category was not available, so the KCTCS system office was compared against associate college medians. The medians represent a typical position at that type of institution. If the position is different due to the scale of the school or different responsibilities, there will be variation in the median. There will be variation from the median. Salaries were considered to be different than the median when salaries were at least 25% greater than or less than the median. If multiple individuals held a position in a year, their salaries were combined before being compared against the median. This high threshold was selected to remove any smaller variations that may be due to differences in background or the institution itself. Tables 13 through 38 of the supporting material compared submitted positions against the Coupa HR median for their classification. This table, the one above, summarizes the median comparisons and shows the number of positions that were above or below the median and the total number of positions sampled in 2019. Salaries above the median were most common at Northern, the University of Kentucky, and the Community College System Office. Amounts below the median were most common at Western, the community colleges themselves, and Kentucky State. In addition to the community colleges commonly having salaries below the median, no position at the community colleges was above the median. Looking only at the universities, athletics administrators were the most likely to be paid above the median, with 6 universities reporting larger salaries. These were also the positions paid the most above the median, with chief athletics administrators at the University of Kentucky, Western, and Northern paid 100% or more above the median. Chief executive officers were the next most likely to be paid above the median, with 5 universities reporting presidents paid above the median. These ran from 27% above the median at the University of Louisville to 70% above the median at the University of Kentucky. Institutions were asked to comment on positions with salaries at least 25% above or below the median. We received a response from all institutions in time for this presentation. The University of Louisville, Eastern, Northern, and Western all stated that compensation was influenced by market competition for staff, with the University of Louisville and Northern specifying companies and corporations as factors. The University of Kentucky, University of Louisville, Eastern, Northern, and Kentucky State said responsibilities of staff influenced compensation, with responses specifying that staff took on additional responsibilities or managed large functions. The University of Kentucky said that higher level positions like the Chief Academic Affairs Officer and the Chief Business Officer worked for both the education and healthcare functions and had broad responsibilities. KCTCS staff said system office compensation was above the median and college compensation was below the median because it operates differently from other institutions. Staff at the system office have leadership roles or specialist duties whose pay reflect market conditions for specialized roles, whereas staff at the colleges have a smaller focus on local community needs. The University of Kentucky and the University of Louisville staff both said their institutions differ from other doctoral institutions due to their size and complexity. The University of Kentucky staff said its athletic staff should be compared against members in the same athletics division, in this case the Southeastern Conference. Compensation is affected by a number of variables. If a long-term administrator leaves, they may be replaced by a candidate with less experience who receives less compensation. By that same measure, a more experienced candidate may receive higher compensation than their predecessor. Increases in responsibility may also result in higher compensation. Sometimes when a position is vacated, the institution reclassifies its responsibilities before hiring a new employee. Consequently, the salary can change and be higher or lower than the previous salary. These are a few of the complications that exist when attempting to identify trends or make comparisons with salary data across years and at different institutions. Colleges and universities participate in the Coupa HR survey to help benchmark salary data, which can then serve as a reference. Most of our institutions have participated in these surveys. The Coupa HR classifications are not intended to be direct one-to-one comparisons across all positions, but they do allow institutions to make better informed decisions about salary amounts and market demand for similar positions at similar institutions. Likewise, legislative oversight staff used Coupa HR data to show how Kentucky's post-secondary education administrator salaries compared respective to national median salaries for similar positions. Compensation can vary, but institutions should be able to justify why their administrators are paid more or less than the median. And this concludes our presentation, and we welcome any questions.
Thank you, sir. I'll take any questions before we call on the Council on Post-Secondary Education, President Thompson. If there are any questions now, or you can hold them to the end. Representative Blanton. Okay, hold it to the end. I would note, I came into this thinking there was going to be significant issues, and it appears that, I mean, there are some that are out of line a little bit that you would look at that at least pique your interest. And then when you look at the explanation, it appears, and I want to hear what Dr. Thompson and others say, at least I feel good about the way the salaries look across our universities. Maybe that's not right. Well, I'm going to continue to dive into these issues, but I was surprised that there weren't as many things that jumped off the page as there were. I do have one question that I'm going to ask Dr. Thompson. I'll ask you now. I have two questions. One, who are the comparators? When we were looking at our universities against comparing them against who? What universities are in that comparative group?
That group is a national sample of universities. It's going to be, there was about 1,000 of them. It's pretty well divided between it. Let me see if I can pull my information about the divisions. It's going to be all across the nation. It's across different types of schools.
And was Moorhead, just to pick one, was Moorhead compared to the same comparative group that University of Kentucky, University of Louisville were?
No. So University of Louisville, 100% are in the doctoral group. Moorhead's is going to be in the master's group. So that's, as far as I can tell, that's based off the output of degrees. So we're looking at completely different groups. So when we compare those medians, there are different medians for each group.
Okay, and was U of L compared with people in the doctoral category from big cities or just across the country?
It's across the country.
So cost of living in those areas would be perhaps materially different.
It's going to be, it's going to be different in different areas. The only good thing there is it's using a median, so that's going to cut away the very high prices and the very low prices.
Okay.
So anything that's extremely high, we're not really comparing it against. Anything extremely low, we're not really comparing them against.
Okay. And then my second question, I have a question in the queue, is I noticed that there was one thing that jumped out at me, and that was the non-direct compensation at two of our universities. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to find where I tagged that, but is there? I believe it's table 10 on page 11. Most of the universities had low or moderate changes in indirect compensation from 15 to 19, but University of Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky University, and Northern Kentucky. It appears they had more. I said two. I meant to say three. It appears they had much more significant. Not saying that's inappropriate, but it is a red flag. Do we know more about that?
The only thing we had is we have the raw numbers. Part of the purpose of talking to the institutions and asking about these changes was to get feedback on why these numbers were different. Those responses Joel talked about at the end tie into those. If there's any specific positions, I would recommend talking to the institutions. They're all here.
And that could have been explained as, their comp payments when there was a retirement or something. I'll be interested in hear the answer to that. But
yeah, I mean, Northern did tell us that once they left the Kentucky Employees Retirement System, their personnel costs went significantly down. Yeah, so for them, we do know.
What I'm referring to here is specifically only to the Chief Executive Officer. But Senator Carroll, you have a question, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for not being there today. Just in general with staff, throughout you all's review of this, one, are you comfortable with all the data that you received? And some of this you just covered. And then two, are there any areas of this that you all had to take a second look at, or any areas that you recognize as needing a deeper dive into the data?
I personally, I'll let Joel speak on his feelings as well, but I'm generally okay with the data. I have somewhat of a concern with, because we use the actual salary, it's a little confusing for anyone who had to leave or when positions changed or when there's just any variation aside from people being there all year. There's a good number of those positions where that happens. It's not all of them. In the cases where people stayed throughout the year, I feel pretty good about those. In terms of things we had to look at, it was difficult for us to pull things apart because sometimes categories were combined, so it was hard to tell what made it up. Like in some cases, we had retirement combined with health insurance, life insurance. It meant that we couldn't pull that apart and take a look at that. So we had to just do an overall look at it.
Okay, I understand. And I think I have to agree with the chairman. I guess I expected to see more concerns through this, and I'll obviously study the report more closely, but I haven't heard anything that alarmed me either. And I appreciate you all's work on that. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. We will call on. We can ask any other questions later on to these gentlemen. But we will now call on Dr. Thompson. Dr. Thompson, I suppose you're with us virtually.
Indeed, I am.
And now you are in charge. Take over, sir.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair, good to see you. Good to see the committee. And I want to introduce the two folk I'll be introducing a little more in detail in a second, or they'll be introducing themselves a little more detail. But I have with me Paul Zarapata, who's the president of KCTCS, and I have also Luis Diaz, who's the chair of the board at EKU. We thought that these folks would be able to give you a little more context to these numbers. And before, I have to tell you, for those who know me, I can't go by without telling you what's going on in higher ed first before we get to this specific item. And I'll make it fairly fast, but I do want to give you an update. First of all, I want to thank you, by the way, for the budget increase last year. That's the first one we've had in a long time. And we, in fact, with our performance funding model, are using those dollars in such a way that has allowed a lot of wonderful behavioral change on our campus to increase student success. The other thing I'll tell you, you know this already, higher education is truly the most direct correlation we have to an educated workforce and the most direct correlation we have to an economic development system that feeds us in the future. So I do appreciate those strategic dollars, and I wanted to thank you for that first. I also want to give you a little bit more about some of the good news that have happened over the last many years. Since I've been in this role, as you probably know, we've had the lowest tuition increases in the last almost 30 years. But in 2021, our residential undergraduate tuition rates only increased by 0.7%. And for this coming year, the overall will be a 1.1%. That is significantly below inflation rates, as you all know. We've also been closing achievement gaps, and I'm proud of this because Kentucky is starting to look as if we're leading based on our baseline, of course. Our credentials are up in the last year at KCTCS significantly, but our underrepresented minority credentials are up 7.1%, and at our four-year institutions, our URMs are up by 4.8%. To put it in perspective, since 2014, our underrepresented minority rate percentage is up 40%. Our STEM is up 30%. These are all items that go directly to the needs we have in Kentucky to get that educated workforce I mentioned a few minutes ago. The number of short-term certificates that you called on us to increase to make sure that we are providing for those employers that need it, it's been up significantly. And in 2020, we were up 9.5%. And this trend is overall really up since 2005, 110%. So these are some of the things that we're doing in Kentucky with higher ed that I thought you may be curious about or want to know. Also, you've asked us to increase that pipeline. And as you well know, we are concentrating heavily on that P20 way of thinking about education in this state. And so for our dual credit, as an example, we're up 10% in the last year. And we're going to continue to grow. We've been up over 75% in the last 6 years. And we appreciate the General Assembly for providing dollars to make some of that happen. So now to this report. You know, as a methodologist, and I apologize to these presenters if I say anything that I may not fully understand, but you know, overall, these folks did a really good job, I think, on this report. And I appreciate the chairs, co-chairs pointing out that, you know, it wasn't as bad as you thought it would be. It's what I thought I heard. We feel good about what we're doing. As you all know, we run big organizations, big cities, if you want to call it that in some cases, or small cities for sure, and other cases. And it takes a lot of educated people to make these things happen. So we do want to thank the post-secondary administrator compensation study folk who did these, the methodologists who put this forward. Now, we also acknowledge there's a value in examining compensation levels across campus administrators, because we want to know that we're staying competitive, true enough, but we also want to know that to us, we have to show value to our community and to the public. And I will point out CPE's role. We don't have any direct authority in hiring presidents or setting their salaries, but we do work closely with our institutions to ensure that we have good folk coming into those higher level positions. Some of the things that I want to point out that I think that the study shows that are fairly positive to us. And my staff, Bill Payne and his crew, identified several of these positive aspects. The study relied on national recognized sources to do things like identify job titles and obtain compensations from peer institutions. And I'll come back to that in a minute because there may be a limitation there I want to point out. The study used appropriate methods, such as time series analysis and peer group comparisons. It also made appropriate median salary data as a peer group comparison, and that is the way you would do it. The inclusion of Table 2, though, is vital to this conversation because it helps explain the changes in compensation between 2015 and 2019. And I think the presenters pointed that out. I mean, a lot of things changed during that time, right? You had a lot of turnover. People may actually, and we did this in all of our institutions, we combined many jobs as we went through a cut or went through an efficiency process. I know I did it in my office. So we may have given one person multiple jobs that we in fact had two people doing before. So all of these are contextual pieces of knowledge I think we have to have as we discuss this. So with that in mind, we noticed some limitations I want to talk about. For some of the positions at some of the institutions, the study showed large percent increases or decreases in compensation over time, but didn't thoroughly examine the root causes for those. And I think that's important to this. I mean, it is important because there's a lot of explanation around, there's a lot of qualitative understanding around these quantitative outcomes. So that's important to know. CPE also believes the relative large changes in compensation may be due to some other contextual factors, such as the actual amount paid you use instead of annualized salaries, a high degree of occupant turnover, has already been mentioned, and frequent changes in job titles. As they pointed out, those are significant limitations to explain fully these outcomes. We also believe there's factors that we want to make sure that we understand that when you're driving comparison data. For an example, you take a UK, it was compared to private institutions also that would maybe fall in that research extensive category. It compared, as co-chair pointed out, it compared maybe urban settings to rural settings. And some may have institutions that provide a lot of STEM-H areas such as dental schools, med schools, and so on, and some may not. So as we do these peer comparisons, it's important. Just like I think UK responded that when you look at athletic directors, for an example, SEC kind of stands out. They do. And I don't know this for a fact, but I would gather if you compared those data, you'll find the athletic director at UK may not be in that top element of those comparative data within that. So as we look at face validity, we have to make sure that we are comparing apples to apples. Once again, I think this study did a really good job with the data that they had to do what I consider to be an excellent study, to be honest with you, as a whole. But I did want to point out truly some of the issues that we may want to think about or look at if we ever decide to replicate this study. And Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take any questions before I turn it over to Paul Zarapata, or I can wait till those two gentlemen make their reports, and then we will all answer any questions you may have.
Let's go ahead and have them testify if we might, Dr. Thompson. And
yes,
we'll
sir.
have questions.
President Zarapata, I'm going to turn it over to you next.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I appreciate it. I appreciate the committee inviting me out. I'm about 4 months officially as KCTCS president. I've had the opportunity to get out and speak to several of you. I hope to get out and talk to all of you to tell the story of KCTCS. I think we've got a good one to tell, and we're here to get Kentucky back to work when the state needs it the most. I want to take just a second to kind of describe what the KCTCS System Office is. If you take a look at, let's say, a Yum Brands or a franchise headquarters, that's a lot like what we are. We run centralized systems so that our colleges don't have to, and we get efficiencies of scale and also of economies of scale. And so just a few examples, we've got centralized payroll, our networking, our IT, accounting, legal, benefits, our learning management system, basically any technologies that sit in front of our students. We handle those out of the system office. And in many cases, that takes specialists. And so that is why our salaries appear higher in some cases. I'll give a perfect example. For any of you that need to hire cybersecurity architects or engineers, they get paid a really high premium right now because of all the concerns going out. Our colleges don't have to staff those folks. We do here in the system office. I would want to point to table 6. You can see where we have made some dramatic changes in salaries here in the system office, and we will continue to do that. I'm here to make sure we're running lean and efficient as possible. And that I'm happy to take any questions right now or wait until after we've got any following statements.
We'll wait until Dr. Thompson has all of his folks testifying.
Thank you, sir.
Chair Diaz.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having us this afternoon to speak to you all. I think my name is, as mentioned, Louis Diaz, and I chair the EKU Board of Regents. when I'm not volunteering with EKU, I do work and serve as a partner at the law firm of Dinsmore and Scholl. The first thing is I want to thank the LRC staff and the committee for engaging in this work and creating a work product. Boards and commissions and university boards, I think we are the boots on the ground, if you will, in this space in evaluating the university's budget and hiring the president, negotiating a contract, setting the expectations, and setting the compensation. This work informs that process and gives us more information that's necessary to make the best possible decisions to ensure that we as universities are competitive in what essentially is a national workforce and a very portable workforce. And in Kentucky, I think we agree that we want to be at the forefront and we want to have the best leaders at our institutions so that we've got the best institutions, both for Kentuckians and for people that don't live in Kentucky that might move to Kentucky for higher education and stay in Kentucky and become taxpayers. I also want to share with the committee that in 2020, EKU went through a turnover in presidency and we negotiated a new contract with our current president. And I want to share in that process, with the assistance of our university council, we solicited the contracts for university presidents that we thought would be our peer group. And in that, we looked at Tennessee Tech, Tennessee Martin, Southeast Missouri State University, Murray, Moorhead, Northern Kentucky, Western Kentucky, Kennesaw State in Georgia, and Eastern Illinois. We didn't have access to the national data, but we took a very, very targeted approach in looking at institutions of similar size that were regional in nature, both within Kentucky and out of Kentucky. We were also in a period where performance-based funding was something that we felt was important to the legislature. So we incorporated a concept of performance-based salary within our president's contract. So to the extent that our president is successful in growing our institution, growing enrollment in the institution, and growing the tuition revenue on a per student basis, the base salary for the president can be adjusted on an annual basis on a formula. And we felt that that mirrored what the state legislature and the executive branch at the time was asking us to do, which is to award more degrees. And to award more degrees, you have to enroll more students and you have to retain more students. So it was an alignment of policy at the board level with the legislative level. Presidents in Kentucky and really anywhere, they live at the intersection of education, of healthcare, of research, of workforce development. We also, as boards, expect them to engage with the outstanding faculty that work at our institutions, with business leaders within Kentucky and beyond, with alumni, with local elected officials, with state and federal regulators. And for a residential campus like Eastern Kentucky University, we expect our president to keep our students safe while they're on our campuses, living in our communities. It is a very difficult job that sometimes, and in particularly in August when all those students are moving in, can be a 24-hour job, 7 days a week, with many sleepless nights. And so we're very, very grateful to the committee for soliciting this work to help inform the work that we do on the board, and very, very thankful to LRC staff for the work and the professionalism in producing this for us. This is certainly an asset that we, as we continue to budget and evaluate presidents. Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions that the committee might have. And again, thank you for having us today.
Mr. Chair, that's our presentation. Happy to entertain any questions you may have of us.
Thank you, Doctor. I'm going to go first to Representative Blanton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for your presentation. First of all, this is a comparative analysis of administrators. Do you all have something similar with the professors as well that work at these universities and colleges?
We do. We do have comparison based on, their rank, if you will, whether they're an instructor that's full-time without tenure track, whether they're a tenure track assistant professor or an associate professor with tenure or a full professor. And we also compare it within disciplines. As an example, if you're in the humanities, those comparisons may look different than if you're teaching chemistry, as an example. So we do have those data. As a whole, we're below those Coupa benchmarks, or below those benchmarks that the Chronicle gives us also to look at. And partially is, and you already know the answer, I know, is that we've had a decrease in funding for state input, and we've limited tuition. So there's been not enough dollars, if you will, going into the coffers to give raises at the rate. Now, I'm concerned about this, just to be straightforward, because we could have this brain drain that creates far more likelihood that we're going to have to get more money to compete to get new people in. And by that comparison, so hopefully that answers that question.
Yes, sir, Dr. Thompson. Would it be possible for us to get a copy of those comparisons?
Yeah, I think each institution, I'll have my CFO reach out to the folks and get that for you.
Thank you, sir. And I asked the question because there is a few things that jumps out to me. I see some universities and colleges that have made increases, some has made decreases over the last 4 years, the comparison that we see. And I see possibly, it's hard to say without seeing what our professors are making right now, but in some instances we're a little bit top heavy, and that I'm more about paying that person that's in the classroom teaching more so sometimes than the administrator and those higher ends. But one of the things that jumped out to me was country club dues as part of the indirect. I'm not sure that the public would sit very well. That would sit very well with them, knowing they're paying country club dues when they have seen increases in tuition go up over the years. Although we've did a good job this past year, it seems to be a consistent mode, and just concerns that we're pricing our middle class students out of an opportunity to get an education because of some of those things. So just my thoughts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to let Chair Diaz directly answer that, since he has a little more control over that than I do. But I will tell you, as someone who's been on the campus as a president, I mean, much of those doesn't come from general funds. They come from foundation funds. So I did want to point that out, and which more the philanthropy that they get. And they use country clubs, obviously, as a way to, lack of better phrasing, court people to give us money. But I will let Chair Diaz answer that more specifically for you.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. The first thing that I think is worth mentioning is the affordability piece in terms of pricing out students and pricing out the middle class. That is something that is very sensitive to our board and our institution, which is why we have consistently held tuition at 0% leading up and through 2020. And during the recession over last summer, we were able to negotiate with our private partners to ensure that our meal plan stayed at 0% increase, that our tuition stayed at 0% increase, and our housing options stayed at 0% increase. And that required some negotiation with private vendors, because we don't control all of the housing units on campus exclusively. And we have a private vendor that operates our dining facility. Also, with respect to affordability, this year, for the first year ever at Eastern Kentucky University, we have implemented, through the vision of our president, a Booksmart, program, which effectively every student, when they show up to campus in August this week, I think today is the move-in date. When they get to their dorm room, there will be a maroon box with all of their day one books, and that has been incorporated into the cost of their attendance, and that's the cost that the university is absorbing, so that students don't have to choose between whether they can afford to eat or afford a book. And that's something that we think is important. And we think it's important for our middle income students and our students from more economically distressed areas. With respect to the country club dues, I can speak for Eastern Kentucky University that the country club really is the Arlington golf course that the institutions. And so to the extent that membership at Arlington is provided in the president's contract, that's our own golf course. So in some ways, it's certainly a ledger entry in the university's books where the right hand of the university is paying the left hand of the university for the president's access. But in that conversation about the president engaging with business leaders, engaging with leaders in the community, some of that's going to happen at the university's golf course, where we do in fact bring alumni and have events to help the foundation grow and so on and so forth. So there's not dues paid to a country club that is a third party. That's all in-house and within EKU. And another thing that's worth stating is that the cost of bad leadership at an institution far exceeds the compensation paid to a great leader. And as board members, we have to ensure that the presidents that we hire are in fact great leaders and that they're focused and committed to the communities and the institutions that employ them.
I want to add one other item on the affordability issue. If you looked at my Twitter, and I'm sure all of you follow me, I know you do, you would see that I put out an infographic today that pointed to, since 2012, 2014, student debt has been going down in our public institutions, both at the 2-year level and the 4-year level. It's been going up in our private, nonprofits, and for-profits, but been going down. The reason why our campuses now exceed campus aid more than state aid. And so I'm proud of what they've been able to do. Almost all of our campuses now have a promise program. They've done a really good job of putting what tuition dollars they have, as well as philanthropy dollars and general fund dollars, into putting their money where their mouths are and really giving it back to students. So affordability is truly one of the things we have to focus on. And as you all know, I'm not shy about saying that. And I want our campuses are doing exactly that.
Before we move to the next question, there was a portion of Representative Blanton's question that I didn't hear Chairman Diaz in his wonderful respond to, and that is the country club membership. I wonder if staff has a response to that or have any further questions. I would also note that I think there may be an issue with it being donated, so it's not general fund dollars, so maybe that's an explanation that's to their benefit. And while we're looking at EKU, I wanted to point out on slide 7, EKU, I don't mean this to be a pejorative to any of the other universities, but EKU has the most amount of money that's going directly to its students, with the least amount of money going to its administrative staff. So I think it's to be commended on that score. And I'll come back to slide 7 with another question in a bit, but I wanted to put that into context of something that EKU is to be commended on. You have a response, sir, to Mr. Blanton's question?
I just had the data on the country club cost. I just want to provide it very quickly. That was only at Eastern. There's no other university that said they provided country club memberships. Those amounts range from about $990 to about $3,000. The median on that's about $2,800. The people it was provided to were athletics administrators, chief business officers, chief development, chief academic affairs, chief legal affairs, and the CEO. So,
thank you. And I'll give Chairman Diaz an opportunity to respond more if he'd like to. If not, we'll move on.
Mr. Chair, just to restate, I think the country club that we're discussing here is the Arlington Country Club, which is in fact owned by the institution. So those, to the extent that dues are paid, they're essentially an internal entry between one arm of the university to another arm of the university. So in effect, we're creating a ledger entry for the sake of transparency that there is a benefit to the administrator for using the asset that the university owns.
Thank you. Perfect explanation. I would ask Dr. Thompson, there was information that Representative Blanton asked for. I'm going to ask you if you could to get that to Mr. Hopman, who's our chief staff member on this committee. He'll reach out to you for that. Senator Nemes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple comments and then a question, if that's all right.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Thompson, it's a pleasure to see you again. When I was at the cabinet, it was a pleasure working with you. Sometimes I think with your intellect and knowledge, you were just putting up with me, and I appreciate that. But I am here now, and I am on the A&R committee, so that might help you out a little bit. I wanted to compliment you on giving a realistic idea of what a graduate can expect to make with a particular degree. I think that's a lot of the debt and kids coming out of school thinking they're going to make this when it is not realistic, and I applaud you for doing that. Also for the low tuition and the short-term real-life careers and diplomas, especially KCTCS is better fit to do that. So my question is, with KCTCS, has there been any more discussion on the registered apprenticeship program coming to KCTCS?
We'll let President Zarapata answer that, but I'll take a moment of privilege to say it's so good to see you again, and what a privilege it was to work with you, and privilege it is to work with you now. And I think at times you were just putting up with me. So good to see you. President Zarapata.
Certainly. We obviously are doing a lot right now to work on apprenticeships. I think in the past quarter, we have added another 12 companies, if I'm not mistaken. There have not been discussions as far as any type of official transfer of apprenticeship programs over to us. I mean, we would obviously be open to the discussion, but that is something that we've kind of taken a different model in the apprenticeship approach. Some companies don't necessarily like the overhead associated with having to manage an apprenticeship, and so we've started to take that over. And so we work with the company and come up with some agreements. And it seems like as some of the COVID restrictions are starting to, they were starting to lift, they're starting to come back in now. We're getting more traction along the apprenticeship route.
Thank you. I think maybe you need to be schooled a little more on apprenticeship in the companies. And I think the other states are the KCTS type of system. It is with them, and they've been very successful. So I think a discussion with the administration and that of moving it at least be talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Sounds like
I want to add one other thing.
Yes, sir,
along those lines. As you all know, with the help of Representative McCool, he put the bill forward in the Student Right to Know bill, and we've produced, I don't know if you've seen it, if not, you need to look at it. We look at every major, how much students borrow for that, how much they probably should borrow for that, the job prospects for it, how much those jobs pay. And so and I'm talking with the commissioner now, I want every high school student at least to be able to see this. This is transparency at the level that I think we need to be showing, and our campuses are on board. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that and play with that, I think you're going to be thoroughly impressed. I appreciate my data staff along with KY Stats that have really, I think, put together a usable item. Now we're trying to get a little money and make sure we put it on an app where everybody can have it on their phones. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Thank you, Dr. Thompson. I have a question, and then I've got a comment, and I'm going to have a question about Kentucky State University. So I know there's a few members of KSU on the line. I just go ahead and tag them and let them know I'm going to have a question for them in a moment. My comment is I very much appreciate as Chairman Diaz mentioned, the transparency here. I found a lot of the responses that were given to be very helpful. For example, I looked at the University of Louisville as I was diving in. I looked at the pay of the University of Louisville legal affairs officer, which was had me dig a little bit more. And once I looked at the explanation, it was perfectly understandable. You know, they're competing in Louisville with corporations, but also large law firms. And I think maybe that legal affairs officer probably may not get paid as much as the market would demand. So I think the explanations and the transparency were very helpful to me. And so I want to commend all the universities for that. Let me turn, if I might, to Kentucky State University. As I talk with legislators in the Senate and the House and on both sides of the aisle, we're proud. We're very proud of our universities across the Commonwealth. You have a tremendously important mission, and you're accomplishing it in difficult circumstances. and I want to commend all of you for that. That pride includes Kentucky State University, which has a tremendously important mission in our Commonwealth. It always has a historically unique mission, and it will continue to have that for decades to come. And we all want to foster that, and we want to support that. If I might turn your attention to slide 7 as just a way to ask my question. I see that once Northern Kentucky University, they get out of the pension system and their contributions or their amount of money they spend on administration goes to 53%, 53.7%. I see that Kentucky State University is a bit of an outlier in how much they spend as a percentage of their expenditures to personnel costs. So I'd like to have a response to that on the reason. But really my question is, we've heard a number of times as we've had problems at Kentucky State University that we get the right people, things are going well, and it appears that it doesn't happen. And we're now in a little bit of turmoil, a little bit of transition might be a better word. So what can we do to help? We're proud of KSU. We want KSU to get on its feet and to lead. What can the General Assembly do to get KSU where it needs to be and where the folks that go to KSU deserve it to be?
Well, I'll take the first part, and I'm going to ask Greg Rush to take the part on the percentage. As you all know, you saw the executive order where the governor has asked me and CPE to go in and to do a variety of things. One is, yes, look at the dollars, making sure that we're in a place of a good, strong, balanced budget and a place of making sure debts are paid and making sure that we are able to do the things we need to do. I am committed to Kentucky State University being a HBCU. It's our only public HBCU. There is a place for it in Kentucky and in the nation. And it's important that it operates at the level it needs to not just survive, but to thrive. And with that in mind, I will be coming to the legislature as well as to the governor's office. And once we figure out all the ins and outs, we're still looking at exactly where we're at, to be honest with you. But it's more than just providing money to get back to square one. We need to be developing centers of excellence at this institution that would serve the state in a variety of capacity, that would serve even possibly the nation. Now, I argue this for all of our institutions, but Kentucky State has a unique way and is small enough to be nimble to do some of the things that at least that I have in mind or others have in mind with me to make it happen. So what the General Assembly can do is to put our heads together to really think about a strategic process and investment in creating these centers that both will serve. I'll give an example of education. We've got to create a path system that KSU is a center part of to have more educators of color, working with more teachers to make sure they know how to do things like close gaps better, and so on. But we also need to think about what we can do with our STEM-H program. If you look at healthcare, I'm the chair of Baptist Health, and I can tell you there's tons of needs for us to be able to recruit, retain, and put more minority nurses, as an example, and other healthcare professionals. But look at state government. I mean, KSU is the institution at the Capitol, right? How do we have better relationships in a more formalized way to be able to do things that we need to do to ensure that there's going to be a sustainable, educated, healthy state government, if you will, that we can play a huge part in? I will let Greg answer the more specific question around the percentage.
Good afternoon, Chair Nemes, and thanks for the opportunity to speak with you today. As Dr. Thompson mentioned, I'm Greg Rush, the Vice President for Finance Administration at KSU, and with me is Candace Ragland, who's our Director of Human Resources. If I understand slide 7 correctly, it is our total, or it's the total of all payroll, including faculty, staff, and administrators, compared to total expenditures.
I'm told by staff that's correct.
Okay. And I just wanted to make sure. The, part of the KSU mission is to be a small, comprehensive university. Historically, we have smaller class sizes and kind of a more nurturing environment, which is part of the HBCU mission. And that tends to, we tend to have more staff because of that. You know, we'll have a 11 or 12 or 13 to 1 faculty student ratio versus a 20 to 30 to 1 ratio in some of the other schools. And we also try to have more wraparound services and more support for students in a student engagement and student success areas. So I do, you know, we're going through a review right now of everything, as you know, and reviewing all expenditures. We're reviewing personnel. We're reviewing pretty much everything to do with the university from a financial standpoint. And we'll have some more recommendations over the next few weeks. And we're working with Dr. Thompson and his staff to develop a plan going forward. And that percentage is something that we'll keep in mind as we go forward with that. I would expect, given our size and mission, we're likely to be higher than the other institutions, but we'll make sure and verify that that's a reasonable amount for our school of our size.
Thank you, Mr. Rush. I want to note that as the chair of the Oversight Committee from the House side, KSU's future will be something we'll be looking at very closely, something we care about. When University of Louisville had problems recently, that was an administrator issue. We solved those. It appears to be more systemic at KSU, so we'll be trying to assist you guys. But let me also note that I'll be looking to Representative Graham as someone who this is in his district and he cares a lot about it. Someone we all have a lot of respect for and trust, and so I expect that you will be working closely with Representative Graham to improve KSU, because I think we probably need in the legislature to have more of a role at KSU than we do other places because of the seemingly intractable problems that we've had there in the last at least decade. Dr. Thompson, do you want to close us out, or any other questions? We do have one more question before you close.
Okay, sure.
Senator.
Thank you, President Thompson. This is Senator Thomas. First of all, I want to thank Representative Nemes and his comments. I think the questions are very valid. These days, many places I go, in the constituencies that I interact with, I get a lot of questions about Kentucky. Representative Nemes, I appreciate what you said. I think your questions are quite valid. I guess I have several comments. First of all, and I want to begin by saying I'm very proud of what we did this year, President Thompson, in which we as a legislature increased appropriations for the first time since I've been here, really the first time since 2008. We gave the state universities a 2% increase. That was a step in the right direction. And as a result, when people talk about tuition increases, what we see is that they did not occur this year. Not this year were there any tuition increases, and that's the direct result of the fact that we finally decided to pay state universities. And I hope, President Thompson, you come back very boldly this year and ask for an additional, at least additional 2% increase or not more regarding higher education, because if we value it, we got to pay for it. Okay, you've done a great job as President CPE. You did a great job as interim president of Kentucky State University. I want to put that on the table today. I want that to be put in the minutes. You did a great job as president of Kentucky State University. And so I think we need to continue to fund higher education. And I want you to take the lead and be very bold in doing that. As for compensation, again, I agree with Representative Nemes and my colleague, Senator Carroll. I saw nothing in here that was out of line. I think we need to recognize this, that our universities compete nationwide. And I want to go to UK, which obviously is my constituent. UK now competes with every major university in this country. So we have a faculty administrators on UK who leave UK to go to institutions like Stanford and like Yale. Okay. Conversely, we recruit people at University of Kentucky who could have chosen Stanford or Yale. UK competes with every major national institution in this country. And so therefore, when it comes to compensation, we've got to be in that ballpark. And there's nothing else I can say about that, period. I want to go back to something also that Regent Diaz says, which is so accurate. And what Eastern has done pinpoints this. He made the comment that the cost of bad leadership exceeds the cost of paying good leaders. And that is very true. Just look what Eastern has done. Eastern has hired a number of good presidents that have gone on to go to even great institutions. Brigham Young University, Coastal Carolina. President Benson is now at Coastal Carolina University. And being someone who's been in Myrtle Beach quite a bit now, he is getting high remarks for his leadership at Coastal Carolina University. So Eastern has done an excellent job over his last two presidencies with hiring good people who've gone on to greater universities. As I said, Brigham Young University, Coastal Carolina University. And that's good leadership. You got to pay good people. I just made that point about UK. I'm making that same point about Eastern. You've got to pay good people if you want to succeed. And so his point, I want this legislature to think about that, as we go into the analysis of how we want to fund education. I sit on the school funding task force this interim. I say the same thing. If we want to have good quality education, we've got to pay for it. Okay. And then I want to go back to Representative Blanton's point just briefly about country club dues. I would submit that if you took your 250 top universities in this country, the top 250, that all the presidents and major leaders have major academic leaders there have some access to country clubs. That's just the way we do business now. That doesn't bother me in the least. We here on the legislature have country club access. Okay, and people might want to say, what do legislatures need country club access for? But we have country club access here if we want it. So I mean that's just a cost of doing business, as a major institution of higher education in this country, not Kentucky, in this country. So again, I agree with Representative Nemes. I agree with Senator Carroll. There's nothing in here that raises any eyebrows. And again, just to conclude, I think, Aaron, you've done a good job. President Thompson, you've done a good job at CPE. And I ask you to continue to be assertive in saying that we need to continue to pay for higher education in the state because it's a must for the people of Kentucky if we're going to move forward generationally here in this state.
Thank you, Senator Thomas, for your remarks. I need to hang out with you more often because I agree with everything you said, but I don't know about country club access for legislators. My family does pay for the YMCA, but I don't know that we have access. At least if we do, I don't know about it. Senator Carroll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Thompson, thank you for the presentation today. In thinking through the conversations that we had, and I remember back a few years ago, and I think the legislator that perhaps initiated this study, Senator Syme, and I think the main issue that was of concern at that point was not perhaps so much what the individual salaries were, but the classification of administration within the colleges and universities about being top heavy. And I don't think we addressed any of that. I didn't hear that today, but could you make a comment on that, and staff, if you have any knowledge to support this or refute this? But I know Senator Syme was concerned about just the total dollars spent on administration being exorbitant in our colleges and universities. Any comment at all, sir?
I do. I have a lot of comments actually on that, but I'll make it short. It's important that we once again compare apples to oranges, and I mean apples to apples, not apples to oranges. Let me give you an example, then I'll explain more. When I took over the CPE, you probably know we went to test optional minimum admissions state. But if you didn't have a certain GPA, the campuses had to provide wraparound services for students to be successful. We also took those 0 credit developmental ed courses my first day in the position, and actually got rid of those at our 4-year institutions. And our KCTCS campuses can only offer one. That's for those that are really the most needy. So this was about student success. This was about helping our students get what they need. That's what equity is. It's those inputs based on where a student is at to make sure that they have the opportunity to do like me, come from an illiterate household in Eastern Kentucky and become the head of higher ed. We have administrators, the real big increase in administrators are in those student support areas. They're not the administrators you're thinking about in this context. So the percentage is, once again, you have to understand what we're talking about. And many of those are designed to truly increase retention. Let me give you some numbers. Most of our four-year institutions now are hovering around about 80% retention rate. Who would have ever thought that, right? We've seen our graduation rates increase. This is all about the focus. We saw a 30% success rate for those in developmental math. We got rid of it with the wraparound services. We're now at 70 and 80%. So when we look at higher level administrators, we don't see a big proliferation of those. We do see administrators that don't fall in the faculty line are falling in those student support, academic support areas, advising, tutoring, mentoring, a lot of those areas that actually go to help our students to be successful. Now, don't get me wrong. I think we will and need to concentrate on, and I appreciate Senator Thomas and Co-Chair Nemes in these statements, that it is important for us to not just say we're doing pretty good, it's to look at how we can now develop a stronger faculty, a stronger student support system. And that will, by the way, just give you a heads up, this coming year, we're going to have a low tuition rate with the hope, with the promise, if you will, I'm challenging here, that you all would give us more money in higher ed. So I hope I'm answering your question. So administrators, that's a big old term. To compare what Senator Syme, and I remember this well, was talking about, he was really talking about those that are in higher level comparisons. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. Don't have all the data, but there's been very little change in percentage over the years for some of those. There's been far more percent change in those that are supporting students.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Thompson. Staff, do you all have any comment or any data related to that? I thought it was important to bring that up because I know with Senator Syme and Dr. Thompson, as you just acknowledged, this was something that was on his mind a lot. And if I remember correctly, it was really what was the impetus of this study. Staff, do you have anything?
With the current data set we have right now, I don't feel confident trying to extrapolate anything from that. We mainly had higher level administrators. From looking at administrator compensation before, I know there's lower level administrators, but the salaries just aren't comparable to what we have here. So trying to extrapolate that based on what we have is probably not going to be accurate.
And if I remember correctly, Senator Syme had documentation, and I think he was basing his concerns over maybe a certain salary threshold and the number of administrators who were above that salary threshold. And I'm trying to remember conversations from a few years ago, but that's kind of what his concerns, the direction they were headed in. But with what we've heard today, I think it hopefully will kind of put that to rest. And Senator Syme, if you were to be seeing this, sir, I hope that answers your question. And Mr. Chairman, thank you so much.
I remember that from Senator Syme, but I would note that his comments were addressed to the University of Louisville, I think, mostly, and University of Louisville's salaries since then have actually decreased as an average for I think that's what the report says. So we're going to have a comment from Senator Thomas, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Thompson to close us unless there are any other questions.
Yep.
Senator.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know this sounds quite unusual, but I intend to be brief here. But I would be remiss if I didn't say anything about Kentucky State University because, full disclosure, I have a rich family legacy at Kentucky State University. But we do need Kentucky State University to thrive. We need that institution. It has provided much in terms of education and leadership and commerce to Kentucky for well over 150, close to 150 years. It certainly has had its problems, but we can address those, and they are addressable. And President Thompson, I like what you said about some suggestions you have for Kentucky State University. I think they're well taken. We've got to do that, but I'm going to add one. And this time, I promised going forward, I'm going to be more outspoken about Kentucky State because of my family legacy there. I think Kentucky State University, President Thompson, has to get more Kentucky students in that university, in that seats. We've got to get more students from Danville and not Detroit. So I would add that to the mix, that we have got to be very aggressive about recruiting Kentucky students to Kentucky State University. After all, the name is Kentucky State University. So that's something that I want more emphasis on at university going forward as we look for new leadership and new direction in that university. I was glad to see Candace Ragland, the Human Resources Director at Kentucky State University there, because Candace, you've done a good job. I want to tell the legislature, you've done a good job recruiting personnel there at Kentucky State. We've just got to, again, when we do this next presidential search, this time we do have to get it right. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Senator. Dr. Thompson, take us to the wire.
Thank you. Quick summary, but I would be remiss too that if I didn't agree with Senator Thomas once again. When I was there as interim president, we increased our Kentucky population significantly, but I even built a pipeline from Clay County, Kentucky, my home, into KSU. And I think this is important. KSU is for everybody, no doubt, but it's for Kentucky, right? And so I would be remiss if I didn't agree with that. The other thing, I would be remiss if I didn't say that Kentucky State deserves to thrive. We owe her that, all of us, me, you, and everybody else. And I so appreciate the support that I just heard. In the study, once again, we're trying to be as efficient as we possibly can, but we have to be effective too. So we're going to have to think about even how to raise the percent of faculty salaries. We just are going to have to, or we will no longer remain competitive. And that's become a problem. I tell people we are the solution to not only a good, strong economy, we're also the solution to solve this COVID outbreak. It's important that I tell you, as the head of higher education, I feel very good about our campuses. I get along very well with presidents, and we don't just all kumbaya, by the way. And for those who know me, know that that's probably not me, even though we do try to build consensus and unanimity around the support of our students and the places where we occupy in this state, supporting that area as well as the overall state. I appreciate you all. I appreciate this study. I want to once again offer my admiration as a methodologist to those that did the study. I thought they did a great job with the information they have, and I love the way they presented it. They presented it truly in a way that talked about assumptions and limitations. So I appreciate this, sir. And if there's anything else we can do for you, please let us know.